Welcome, everyone. Welcome. It is another Relate Well Live with Dr. Rick Marks. And it is so good to be here and to encourage you, to inspire you, and maybe give you some things to think about as it relates to your relationships and for those that are married, particularly your marriage. All right. And so we're going to have a talk about conflict and taking a timeout. You're you were given a timeout. Mother sent you to the room, or your dad sent you to the room, or it put you in the corner. When I was growing up, folks, they make us stand in a corner with our nose in the corner. You had to stand there with your nose in the corner. you know, you took a timeout. The timeout was so that you would create some peace in the house, actually. But really, the timeout was so you might stop and think. So you can step back and ponder what's going on. And so we're going to talk about taking a timeout in your marriage and what that can look like in a practical way. Now, as I've been saying each time I get on doing Relate Well Live, excuse me, we're broadcasting on YouTube, Facebook, and on Instagram. And so if you're joining me, please feel free to say hello. Feel free to ask a question. Feel free to make a comment. I will be monitoring the comment sections on all three platforms because I'm the type of person that I love teaching and inspiring and educating others. But I also know that if you're out there and you have a question, ask it. Let's make it a dialogue, through this platform. Let's have a conversation, if you will. Yes, you do type, and I will be reading, but at least maybe in some small way, I can acknowledge you. And I'll say to Mrs. It looks like Buddy, gotcha. Hello there. Welcome. Dr. Rick Marks here and founder of RelateWell. And we're a relationship, really, we help people have healthy, strong relationships, be it single, dating, or married. We teach people how to love well by learning how to relate well. If you don't know how to relate well, you can't love well. And if you don't relate well, you don't love well, and you really can't live well. That's just my personal opinion. All right. So if you're with me, Facebook, YouTube, or Instagram, feel free to jump in, say hello, ask a question. We'd love to see who's out there, and let's kind of make this a dialogue. All right. I am talking tonight about calling a timeout on marriage conflict. Calling a timeout when you're in a fight. Hey, Clifton, welcome, buddy. It's good to see you. And thanks for joining us on our earlier Facebook, excuse me, on our earlier Zoom, where we talked about different kinds of sex and marriage. It was great to have you there. I know you got there late, but it was still great to have you, my friend. All right. So this time we're going to talk about different handling conflict in a different way so you can protect it. So for those who are joining in, I want to kind of give you some feedback on who we are and what we're about. We believe in our work that the most important part of any relationship is the relationship itself. We call it us. When us wins, you both win. When us loses, you both lose. It takes two to make an us and only one to kill it. Did you get that? Two to make it, one to kill it. If the way you live your life in your marriage, if the way you treat your spouse in your marriage, if the way you deal with conflict is more about you winning and them losing, you getting the upper hand so they don't, then what's going to happen is that you will win, they will lose, us loses. You see, we believe us is the most important part, and that everything you do in a relationship is based on what's best for us. Now, how do you know if you have an us in your marriage? It's simple. You feel it. You feel it. You always know when us is in the house because you feel it. You feel its presence. Because when us is in the house, you can feel the love, you feel the warmth, you feel the tenderness, you feel the connection. And if you have children, your kids can feel its presence as well. And you also know when us is not in the house because you will feel that as well. When us is not in the house, you'll feel in the house, you'll feel the angst, you'll feel the tension, you'll feel the resentment, you'll feel the unforgiveness, you'll feel the coldness, you feel the silence. And so your children. See, everybody knows when us is in the house, when it's not. You feel its presence and you feel its absence. And what happens is when we get into conflict, our tendency is we start arguing and dealing with conflict from the lower order animal brain, this reptile brain down here, the amygdala, the brainstem, the cerebellum, this area of your brain down here has no ability to think or reason. It is purely instinctual. It is the part of your brain that sure it keeps your heart beating, and yes, it keeps you breathing, those autonomic bodily functions for you, but it also does one thing all the time. It's constantly scanning the environment for a threat. And the moment that your brain perceives a threat at 1/2000th of a second, you get adrenaline, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. You are then triggered into a fight, flight, or freeze response. And when you're triggered into the fight, flight, or freeze response, which are known as the stress response of the brain, it's the brain's stress response to a perceived threat in the environment. Once you're triggered into that, you will communicate from fight, flight, or freeze. If you communicate from a flight response, usually you'll see things like this. You know, whatever. Just go do it your way. You know, fine. You know, you're right. I'm wrong. Great, whatever. Just do it your way. Whatever. I don't want to deal with it. Just go do what you want. You see, in the flight response, your brain is thinking, gosh, actually not thinking, it's reacting, because it doesn't want to deal with conflict. It wants to run from conflict. So you start to appease, you placate, you'll change the subject. All right. You withdraw, you distance yourself. Why? I don't want to deal with anything. And the problem is when you appease and placate, fine, whatever, okay, I'll go. You're not speaking up for yourself. You're actually denying your thoughts and feelings. Just saying, look, just do what you want about this thing. The problem is you become more and more resentful over time because you're really angry. You're not speaking up for yourself. And the more angry you become because you're not speaking up for yourself, the more resentment you'll build. And then that will leak out in dirty fighting. And then you're harming the relationship and your partner. The fight response says, look, you're a threat to me and I'm afraid, so I'm going to squash you before you squash me. And when this happens, you actually become a blamer. You get adrenaline, but this way, when you get adrenaline in the fight response, it's an adrenaline to attack, where the adrenaline you get in the flight response is the run. The adrenaline here, you go, who do you think you are? You're just like your mother. I'm sick and tired of what you do. Man, you're a blamer. You name call. You're harsh. You're critical. You're mean. You could be verbally and emotionally abusive. Why? Because here's what your brain's essentially doing. Your brain is essentially saying, look, you're a threat to me. But if I squash you before you can squash me, I'll feel safe. So the principle is a good defense is a good what? Offense. I'll hurt you before you can hurt me. The problem is whenever you deal with issues from a fight or flight response, you're harming your partner and you are not solving problems. Because once this lower order brain is engaged at 1/2000th second, what the brain does, it shuts off the higher order rational mind, the thinking brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. You see, and when your prefrontal cortex, the word we use is when it's hijacked, then all you are is in adrenaline with no rational controls. Now, let's be honest. You actually want this part of your brain working, all right? Let's say you're driving down the interstate and an 18-wheeler comes across the interstate 80 miles an hour, all right, out of control. for you to stop and think about that threat can get you killed. The thinking brain is actually the slowest part of the brain. This part of your brain, oh, by the way, animals have this as well, because animal brains do fight, flight, and freeze. But this part of your brain, hyper fast, because the moment it perceives that threat of that truck, your brain, that part of your brain, hijacks the emotional brain. So you're not meant to think, you're meant to what? React. You'll jerk the wheel and stay alive. Hopefully, of course. You want that part of your brain working in those kinds of situations. However, in intimate relationships, you better learn to regulate this rascal when it is triggered. Now, you really can't stop it from being triggered, because that's primal. It's like the reptile brain. Some people refer to it as that. You want that part of your brain working. However, in intimate relationships, once you are aware it's triggered, you need to be able to take a deep breath, regulate yourself, and you can do that mostly by breathing to regulate the heart, and access the prefrontal cortex again and make good decisions with what you're feeling. That requires maturity. In our RelateWell program, we actually teach people how to do this. We teach people how to be slow to anger and quick to hear. We teach them how to speak their truth in a loving way. We actually, how to be angry and not sin, if you will. That all requires brain regulation, you see. And we actually teach the skills and tools how to do that. But what happens if in your immaturity, one or both of you is in that lower brain and you're not getting out of it? You see, whenever you're in fight or flight, you're going to fight in dirty, we call it dirty fighting. I like to refer to it, you fight with ill will. That's right. You fight with ill will. You're fighting to hurt. You're fighting to harm. Dirty fighting tactics are things like these: stonewalling. I'm not going to talk to you. Acting like you're a martyr. Acting like you're a victim. Threatening your partner. If you don't listen to me, I'm going to divorce you. Ordering them, you get back in here and listen to me. Disqualifying. Well, I didn't mean to. Lying. I never said that. Forgetting. What did you want anyways? I don't remember. Yes, you do. You're just mad. Using cold logic to hide from emotional reality. That kind of looks like this. Well, I don't know why you're so upset. I'm just trying to understand things, but you're the one yelling, screaming. You're actually what's called the freeze response of the brain when you're in that cold, computer-like mode. There's a bunch of other dirty fighting tactics. We have a bunch listed in the RelateWell curriculum. But what I want you to understand is whenever you're in that lower order brain, you're fighting with adrenaline, either passive aggressive or overtly aggressive, right? The active controls or passive controls. My mentor, Dr. Lori Gordon, said, you're either an iron fist or a velvet glove. An iron fist or a velvet glove. Either way, you're acting out that lower order brain fight, flight, or freeze response. Why? To harm your partner, to hurt them so that you can feel safe again. The problem is you might hurt your partner, and probably will, but in the end, us is damaged. Us is damaged. I learned a long time ago that the most important part of the marriage is not me, it's not Luella, that's my wife, by the way. We'll be married 38 years this coming month. I learned that when us wins, we both win. And everything I do is based on what's best for us. But when I start living for me, then us can be harmed. When I start living for me, us can be harmed. Now, what I'm talking about, I'm here to tell you, goes against Western culture. Western culture actually values individualism, hyper individualism. You see, we don't think about relationships. We know what you'll throw a relationship away just to prove that you're right. You'll throw relationships away just to prove them wrong. We'll throw relationships away just to force them to agree. Do you understand that agreement can kill a relationship? Agreement can kill a relationship. You don't build by relationships by creating agreement. You may not agree. John Gottman, many people quote his research because he's one of the most brilliant researchers out there. His research revealed, listen, folks, 68% of problems in a relationship, he calls them, they're perpetual, they're ongoing, or some people would say they're unsolvable. There's actually no solution to them. 68% of problems have no solution in a marriage. Now, you may be asking yourself, what is a perpetual unsolvable problem? Perpetual unsolvable problems are differences in beliefs, differences in religion, differences in upbringing, differences in culture. You see? They're just different. My wife and I have some perpetual problems. One of them is dog. Dog. I want one really bad. She does not want one. We disagree about dog. But what Gottman's research showed was that what he calls the masters versus the disasters, masterful couples do not allow perpetual or unsolvable problems to destroy the usness. They protect the us from the unsolvable problems. So they do things like just navigate around it or just agree to disagree. Why? Because they'd rather have the us than win a fight, than win an argument. Disaster couples want to win or force agreement, and they kill the relationship off. You know, a higher way of living, a mature way of living, is to say, you know what, though we agree and you disagree, we can agree to disagree and still have our friendship. We can still have our connection. Why? Because we do love each other. And we'd rather have us than force agreement on something that you'll never agree on. Now, what happens, though, when you are arguing and fighting with each other and things are not going well? Things are heating up. Things are not going well in that you begin to call each other names or attack each other's value or dignity. You see, when you're in the cycle of what predicts divorce, 90%, you better do something to protect us. Now, what is this cycle that predicts divorce at 90%? This comes from the research of Dr. Howard Markman and Scott Stanley out of the University of Denver many, many years ago. And so these things predict divorce and distress in marriage. Number one, if you see this pattern in your relationship, right? These are predictors for divorce and distress and divorce. Number one, it's when one person is pursuing and the other person is withdrawing. Now, research shows it's typically the men that withdraw. That's why it's called male withdrawal. When men enter into conflict, with their beloved, we have a tendency to gender to perceive the threat, and we don't want that threat. I always jokingly say, give a guy an M4 and he'll take a hill, right? In combat, ask him to do the same thing with his wife. He's like, not me. And so what you see a lot of men doing is they're like, man, whatever. I don't want to talk about this. You see, so they start withdrawing. And the wife sees withdrawing. Women as in a gender pursue conflict. They want to talk about it. Men see potential threat or harm and they withdraw. So here's how it works. It's not linear. He doesn't withdraw because she's pursuing. As she pursues, he withdraws. But the more he withdraws, she sees, I'm not connecting. So she pursues more, which causes him to withdraw more. It's a cycle. It's a circle. It's called the pursuer-withdrawer pattern. And as long as you're in the pursuer-withdrawer pattern, you're not really connecting, all right? However, when she keeps pursuing and he keeps withdrawing, at some point, the second factor for divorce and distress shows up. So the first is pursuer-withdrawer pattern. Then the second is escalation. He's back in the fight. And when he gets back in the fight, he's no longer doing this anymore. He's like, you know what? I have told you. Now energy rises, voices begin to rise. You start to attack each other, which leads to the third one. It's called invalidation. You start to invalidate your partner. Your highness, you think you know everything, don't you? Oh, you're just like your mother. You're just like your father. You start to invalidate your partner. You tear them down in terms of their personhood. You attack their identity. Ultimately, you're attacking their dignity. You start to show contempt for them. And so pursue or withdraw pattern leads to escalation, because at some point the withdrawer is going to get back in the fight. And now things escalate. And as things escalate, you start to invalidate each other, tear each other down, talk disrespectfully. You treat each other with ill will, not goodwill. And that leads to the next predictor of divorce and distress, which is negative interpretations. You see, your partner said something that they actually meant with goodwill, but because we're both in the low brain, you hear it negatively. You hear it through a negative filter. So you're not actually able to hear what they're really trying to say, because whenever you're in low brain, you're just going to interpret most everything from a negative perspective. I like to say it this way: we tend to see our partners through the prism of our pain. Did you get that? We tend to see people through the prism of our pain. Our pain colors our ability to see clearly reality. And so if you're in this pattern, which predicts distress 90%, Gottman, his four horsemen of the apocalypse, predicts distress at 93%. He says that he has the research, and he does, that when contempt, defensiveness, criticism, and stonewalling are present in your marriage, he can predict with 93% accuracy whether you're in divorce or not. So the goal then is, when you're in conflict, is always to protect us, not just your partner. Protect us, because you can protect your partner at the expense of you. No, it takes two to make an us. So when you protect us, you are protecting yourself. Because when you protect us, you're saying, I value you, I value me, I value us. So you have to have what I call a safety skill that protects us. And so we created in our RelateWell curriculum a timeout skill. Now, I'm not talking about taking a timeout by withdrawing. So I'm taking a timeout and you walk away. Some people think a timeout is things aren't going well. Well, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm taking a timeout, and you walk away and leave. Actually, what you're doing is, in my personal opinion, is you're giving into the flight response of the brain, because you really didn't set a rule around that. So that person that you just walked away from saying, I'm taking a timeout, they're going to feel that as abandonment or rejection. They're going to feel it as you don't care. A timeout rule, and we call it the RelateWell Timeout Rule. The timeout rule has to honor the relationship and your spouse at the same time. It has to send the message that I care about us and you and what we're doing, so to protect our relationship from what we're doing, so that we can re-engage later and deal with it in a healthy way when we're both able to, even at the physiological arousal level. You see, you don't want to deal with conflict when you got adrenaline coursing through your bloodstream, folks. All right. So here you go. What is a timeout? A timeout, let me read to you based on what we say in RelateWell. You ready? Here we go. When things are not going well in an argument, when you start to fight dirty from the lower brain, it is wise to stop the negative energy, cool down, and self-soothe. Protect us in your own heart from negative emotional reactions. And then we have what we call the RelateWell Timeouts Rule. All right, so here is how to take a timeout. Now, the first thing you have to do in your marriage is you both, as an us, have to agree to a timeout rule. You both have to agree that we can do this. And the purpose of the timeout rule, listen, is not to avoid conflict. The purpose of the timeout rule is that when either of us, me or my wife Luella, when either Luella or I sense the relationship conflict is not going well, that there's potential for harm for us, that either of you can call a timeout because you both care about us. So if I sense things aren't going well and I sense that us could be harmed, then I call a timeout. Now remember, the marriage has to agree to this rule. And the agreement is if either of us feel, based on their perspective, that things aren't going well, we both have permission to call a timeout. And if one person calls a timeout, the other is agreeing to abide by that timeout because that person perceives a threat and they want to protect the relationship from the threat. So the first thing you do is when either one of you is feeling overwhelmed, just call a timeout. That's all you do. Say, I need a timeout. That's all. Just, I need a timeout. The other person with goodwill said, okay, apparently things are going well. That's cool. Now, here's the second thing. The length of the timeout needs to be at minimum 20 minutes. You think, hey, Doc, did you come up with 20 minutes out of some random number? Did you pull the rabbit out of a hat and come up with that number? Actually, no. What my research showed is that when a person starts to get flooded with adrenaline, it takes about 15 minutes for adrenaline to dissipate in your body. So I just added 5 extra minutes to make sure. I just really want to make sure that I was not coming back to this conversation with adrenaline still in my, still coursing through my veins, right? And so whoever calls a timeout needs to share how much time. Minimal 20 minutes. We would suggest up to 60 minutes. If you need longer, then just tell that person how long. Because what you're really doing is you're saying, look, I feel that something's not going on or we're not doing well. I sense a potential harm for us. So I want to call a timeout. Why? Because I want to protect us from my perspective. Now, when you call a timeout, tell your partner, just give me about an hour. Give me about an hour. All right. When you do, move to separate spaces. Move to separate spaces. And listen, the Navy calls it, a shot across the bow. There's the enemy over there, and you want them to stop, but they ain't stopping their boat. So you fire a shot straight across the bow of the ship. It's like a warning shot. Don't give them any warning shots. No negative parting shots. Stupid. You're dumb. There's no goodwill in that, folks. No negative parting shots. This is all about goodwill and respect. And so move to separate spaces. No negative parting shots, right? I believe this one would be very important. Don't go medicate yourself with alcohol or drugs. Do not medicate yourself. Because if you do, then when you come back to it after your time limit, you've medicated your brain. And if you really think you can think clearly when you have a medicated brain, so don't go medicate yourself. We say it this way. Next point is do something neutral and constructive. This guy right here, you see all this stuff behind me up there? I'm a big American history nut. Now, I'm a 12-year Navy veteran. So I love the U.S. military, all right? And I love to collect things on military history. In this country, basically, we have Civil War and Revolutionary War. So I like to watch Civil War documentaries, Revolutionary War documentaries. I like to watch documentaries on World War I, World War II, all right? I enjoy those things. And so what I do to do something neutral is I'll go watch a documentary. Y'all don't know this, but I started out actually not in psychology, but criminology. I was studying criminal justice in my first year of college. Um, uh, my early dreams were being an FBI profiler, you know, and so I want to learn profiling, criminal justice. I thought about going into law enforcement. And so one of the other things I do is I'll go watch crime shows. I'll watch crime shows. I'll study and learn about, forensic psychology, and learn about how psychopaths operate, those kind of things. I just kind of enjoy all that. All right. But go do something neutral and constructive. And this is important. Think about something else while you're doing it. Do not allow yourself to ruminate on the problem. Don't ruminate on it. Don't sit back there smoking a cigarette. I can't believe he did this. I can't believe he did that. Why did she do this? You're going to spend a whole hour ruminating on that? All you're doing is you're staying in the low brain. And if you're going to stay in the low brain, you're not thinking about us. You're still thinking about you. And you will harm us when that hour is over, if you even make it to the hour. Don't ruminate on the problem. Give yourself permission to think outside. Now, next, once that hour is over, let's say I gave it 60 minutes, they gave me 60 minutes, they honor the 60 minutes. But here's the key. Whoever called the timeout is the one in our mind who needs to reinitiate, to re-engage. So whoever called the timeout, they're the ones that goes and re-engages. All right. We believe after they re-engage, offer an expression of goodwill. Say something like, honey, I really appreciate you gave me some space and I got to kind of think things through. I appreciate you doing that. Tell them thank you. Appreciate, give them appreciation. Now, remember, the timeout was called because things weren't going well. So what we say in our world, after you go offer an expression of goodwill, use one of the RelateWell communication skills. We encourage using the ExpressWell skill. The ExpressWell skill is a skill that allows you to share all your perspective about that issue, and your partner listens with goodwill. They don't have to agree, but it provides structure so that you can stay out of the lower brain and keep the higher order brain engaged, so you can communicate effectively to each other while you're protecting us. That's what these communication skills do. They allow you to stay engaged with goodwill and respect and empathy, and communicate with goodwill, respect, and empathy. And so we say use one of the RelateWell skills. Why? Because when you use a RelateWell skill, what you're really saying is, I value us enough to regulate myself so I can have goodwill and respect. Why would you want goodwill and respect? Let's be honest. Do you really want to go around intentionally hurting your spouse? If you do, it begs the question, why did you marry someone you intentionally don't like and want to hurt? And I've always learned in my personal journey, professionally and personally and professionally, been in the field of mental health 30 years in some format. If you intentionally harm someone, it begs the question, why did you marry them? Because if love doesn't intentionally harm people, now we may do things in our immaturity and our childishness and our inability to handle conflict well that hurts people. But if you are intentionally harming them, that says more about who you are than it does who they are. There's zero goodwill in intentionally harming somebody. And when you intentionally harm someone, that implies you have contempt for them. You know what the difference between contempt and anger? The difference is this. If you and I are angry at each other, psychologically, emotionally, we see each other as equals. When two people are angry, they angry at each other, they still each other as equals. Contempt is a little more insidious. Contempt says, I'm better than you are. I'm morally superior than you. You're inferior to me. That is why contempt is more insidious than just being anger and being angry, because of what it implies about the other person. And so use the express skill. All right. Why? Because what we're saying is we're going to talk about this issue with rational controls, honoring each other's perspectives about it, feelings and thoughts, because we want us to win. And once you use a skill and you've created understanding, now give each other a hug and thank each other. Thank them for listening. They'll thank you for listening. And what you've done is you actually insert a safety skill. It's like a safety harness. The timeout skill is to make sure you're always protecting us from your lower brain. You're protecting us from your partner's lower brain. Here's the wonderful piece about this. The more you do this, the more you learn self-awareness and self-control. And the more you learn self-awareness and self-control, you will start to regulate yourself on your own so that you don't have to use a timeout skill hardly ever again. I've been married 38 years this February 25th. Folks, I haven't used a timeout skill or needed to 20 years or more. Why? We protect us no matter what now. It's who we are. Why would you get married to be miserable? I didn't. Now, emotionally, I was a child, and emotionally, Weller was mature. So we didn't know how to love well because we both came from broken homes. We never really saw it. So sadly, we had to learn it as adults. But we were so committed to us. We both did the work to transform our lives. But while we were doing so, we sought to protect us. And I can tell you now at age 60, she's 61, we live in such a way, for the most part, 99% of the time, 99% of the time. I want to say 100, but 99 is still good. We live with us. When we argue, it's not really an argument. I mean, technically you call it that. We just have goodwill and respect for each other. We agree to disagree. Why? Because at the end of the day, we want us in the bedroom. Did you get that? At the end of the day, we want us in the bedroom. When us is in the bedroom at night, you can feel its presence, feel its absence. Remember, you know when us is in the house because you can feel it. When us is there, you sleep really well. I hate it when us is not there, and I'll do whatever it takes to get us back. And the first thing I do is I look in the mirror. What do I need to do different, and how am I contributing to the demise of us? You see, the timeout skill, the timeout rule, is a safety rule. It protects us from conflict that's getting out of control. You have to value the us in order to use it. Thanks for hanging with me. I hope this in some small ways been encouraging. We'll be back on tomorrow night at 8 o'clock with another RelateWell Live with Dr. Rick Marks. And by the way, we will be doing during National Marriage Week, which is next week, February 7th to the 14th, we will be doing a free class. If you want to learn more about it, go to www.thecouplescommunication.challenge. That's right. We have a communication challenge coming up next week through our ministry, our organization. So it is thecouplescommunicationchallenge.com. Go there. Yes, we do, Bunny. I'm assuming that's Bunny. Bunny, gotcha. We do coach people. Send me a personal note and we can connect, and we do work through Zoom. We also do marriage intensives for highly conflicted couples. And we do coaching and pastoral counseling as well. Everything we do, though, is based on what's best for us. And my daughter said it best many, many years ago. You save a marriage, you save a generation. And let's be honest, nobody gets married to be miserable. Most of us just don't know how to love well. To love well, you got to relate well. You see that right there? That was me. I did not know how to relate well. I do now. I'm not being arrogant. I'm just telling you. I had great teachers and mentors who taught me how to relate well. And now we just go teach others who are teachable. Blessings. Have a great evening, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow night on all three platforms, Instagram, and Facebook and YouTube, live tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Have a blessed evening. Get a good night's rest, everyone. Good night.